The first ever Global Stocktake is set to conclude at COP28. The results will be an opportunity for countries and stakeholders to see whether we're making progress towards the goals of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. Pacifica TV spoke to the Senior Policy and Government Affairs Manager of WWF Pacific, Alfred Ralifo, to find out what it would mean if the previous goals set out are not being met.
So the Global Stocktake is actually quite key and important, and it is telling us the outcomes of the Global Stocktaking is actually telling us that we are not on a path to achieve the Paris Agreement of 1.5 degrees, and as a result, to me, a decision at the end of this COP on what we do with the outcome of the Global Stocktake is actually quite key and important. And to me, a successful COP outcome would ensure that when we leave Dubai at the end of the 2 weeks, that there are strong commitments and clear commitments from governments, and it's most importantly from developed countries, that they will strengthen and enhance their nationally determined contribution and actions in the next few years to ensure that we are on a path to 1.5 degrees and achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement. I'm actually quite happy that we have loss and damage finance adopted yesterday on the first day of the COP. And so there's also countries already starting to pledge finance commitments into the loss and damage fund. And this is quite important. And it's also quite important that we call on all developed countries to actually continue to invest and pledge new financing mechanisms and funding into the loss and damage fund. Also, it is also quite important to understand that we cannot continue to fund ourselves out of loss and damage because we need to look at the whole picture. And it's been 28 years of the Conference of the Parties of trying to address the climate crisis, and we are failing in that regard. So we need to do much more than just, investing in loss and damage finance, and we need to also look at how we can also phase out fossil fuel, which is the root cause of the climate crisis. And so in addition to pledging, new finances for the loss and damage fund, whether it's in terms of the short-term goals of finance that is needed for developing countries and those that are most vulnerable, but we also need a clear commitment from leaders at the end of this COP on how we need to phase out fossil fuel. And ensure that, because that is the only way we can then achieve the Paris Agreement.
However, does more need to be done?
Yeah, so we cannot solve the climate crisis without addressing the biodiversity crisis. These two are actually closely interlinked. So when we are talking from a Pacific Island countries, our ocean is the biggest ecosystem that we have as compared to our land. And so ocean is actually quite key. And science is already telling us that the biggest threat to our biodiversity is climate change. But also science is also telling us that nature and biodiversity and ocean can be our allies in fighting the climate crisis. So there needs to be a strong synergy between these two conventions, the sister conventions that came out of the Rio. And so how do we use the science to actually provide the guidelines on how we can strongly strengthen the synergies between these two conventions, and guidelines on how we can strengthen our nationally determined contributions by integrating nature and nature-based solutions into our NDCs, but at the same time be integrating, ensuring that we come up with strategies that will allow for nature and biodiversity to be more resilient towards the impacts of climate change. So it's a two-way process, yeah. And that is something that is quite key. And more stronger commitments and clear commitments and decisions from the COP at the end of the 2 weeks on how we can strengthen the interlinkages between nature and biodiversity and the climate convention in terms of climate actions is actually quite key and important.
That was WWF Pacific calling for stronger and clearer commitments and decisions from the COP on strengthening the interlinkages between biodiversity, nature, and the climate convention. For Pacifica TV at COP28, I'm Amelia Rigsby.